focused and fixated on Kenyatta International Convention Center for the first maiden Africa Climate Summit, where also you are advised that Parliament Road, also Taifa Road, City Hall Way, amongst others, are declared red zone. That is not a road that you should use this morning. Just be advised if you're headed to town. And this is because of the commencement of the Africa Climate Summit, where Africa is gagging to have its place as far as the Green New Deal is concerned, shaken into place. We shall be looking at that, of course, a day and a week that is full of activity there at Kenyatta International Convention Center, where our reporters are deployed to give you a blow-by-blow, of course, wall-to-wall, also wire-to-wire live coverage of that as it, of course, ensues there. And we shall be discussing a lot of issues this week regarding climate change as well. And of course, we look at the political aspect of it right now. We know on Friday, the president assented to the climate change bill that also seeks to have the national carbon trading registry, right? That Kenya also has been touted to be one of the leading African countries as far as carbon trading is concerned. We shall be looking at that with the panelists this morning. What does it really portend? And a lot of other issues as well, looking at the political angle as well. But let's see what is fresh off the press before this morning. But before I go there, right? Oh, it's already up. I'll show you what the weather looks like today. This is the standard for you this morning. Africa's big gamble, climate summit. Today, president and heads of government are supposed to come up with climate change resolutions that, among other things, will ensure a continent gets compensation for the crisis. However, this is not the first time leaders are pushing for financing deal. Will the talks yield results? 1.6 trillion shillings, that is the amount Africa needs between 2022 and 2030 to achieve its nationally determined contribution. And that is the story that you want to follow inside the Standard this morning. Also inside you have a blow-by-blow special coverage. Blackwood House, sale of a catalytic converters put lives in danger. There is another story that you can follow inside the Standard as well. But just going back to the front page, if I may, just to give you the gritty details there and to break it down for you, we have the president who yesterday was speaking in a youth summit on climate change, where he said we have an opportunity to lead the world and show that we can industrialize and prosper and achieve this in sustainable manner. Also, this is what is expected as the upshot of this particular summit. African leaders' Nairobi declaration on green growth and climate finance agenda and solution for Africa and the world. That is one of the highlights that will come up with a Nairobi declaration that will be presented to the COP28. And also we have some experts saying that Kenya is likely to be the spokesperson in that particular summit. Also, pathway to a new global financial deal that includes at scale and fit for purpose financing instruments to some specific growth goals. 3, investment commitments, including showcasing multi-billion-dollar worth of green investment deals on the continent. And also, not really the amount, but the announcement on tangible progress on ongoing major continent-wide global initiatives and new partnerships. 5, roadmap for implementation of key declarations. That is another highlight that everyone will be keeping their eyes peeled to make sure that also it is presented. On the teaser on top here, Western governors in trouble over president's tour. That is a story that you want to follow on page 9. Most of the governors assumed, or it was deemed that were leaning towards the Kenya Kwanza side. We've had also the governor of Kakamega coming out clearly and saying he's not really supporting, of course, the side of Kenya Kwanza, as it were. That is Fernandez Baraza. You can follow the story on page 9 of the Standard. Raila mocks route of climate change talks. This is on page 7 of the Standard. And Bongo's reign continues after coup. You can follow the story on page 23, just following what is happening in Mali. And Muranga seals so in league debut. That is a story on page 31 of the Standard this morning. This is how the bold paper looks. It keeps on going to the second page. I shall show you what we have on the front page of the Daily Nation. Climate, the grim reality, Africa Climate Summit. And inside here we can see the president alighting from an electric car. He drove from State House to the KICC in the Nairobi CBD to attend yesterday's closing ceremony of the Youth Africa Climate Change Summit. The Africa Climate Summit starts today. This story continues inside the Daily Nation. From rising temperatures to extreme weather events, our Earth is no longer safe, and even more so for the inhabitants of the global South. Will the African and world leaders converging on Nairobi this week find solution for this and other emerging crises? This is a story that is well covered on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. Raila exit. Who's next in line? That's a probing question. Why the opposition chief may be on his way out. You can read all the details on page 8 of the Daily Nation this morning. Arsenal gets the better of Man U in 4-goal thriller. You can follow the story on page 34 of the Daily Nation. Ali Kach, young anti-plastic pollution champion to address summit. There's a 10-year-old. This is Nigel Waweru, who was appointed by the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry as its young ambassador in May to address summit that will be attended by heads of state, including host President William Ruto. Also on funding, foreign banks fuel climate crisis in Africa. This is what Action Aid report is highlighting as well. You can follow the story on page 3. That report is bound to be launched this Monday. Also, Pakistan PM cancels planned visit to Kenya, and also changing times, evolution of the climate crisis and why you should be concerned. Kenya's State of the Climate report paints a bleak future for the agriculture in the face of climate change. And you can follow the story on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Housing tax, NHIF law could make or break Ruto's rule. There's a double edge here. There's a double edge. Major gamble could change Kenya for better or worse. That story continues inside the Star. And also, the Star is featuring determination, passion, and hard work, which drove Senator Tabitha Mutinda to the apex. You can follow the story on page 8 of the Star this morning. COP28, Kenya likely to become Africa's spokesperson. This is what Ednan Z. Amin, a Kenyan, and who is a development economist. He has more than 25 years of experience in international environment, sustainable development, and energy policy. And you can read all about him and what he says about Kenya being likely to become the Africa spokesperson at the COP28. This is on page 2 of the Star this morning. Disputed Mukuru land belongs to Orbit Chemicals. This is what it has been determined by the court. Directors of Orbit Chemicals Industry Limited have heaved a sigh of relief after the High Court brought to an end a decades-long battle of prime Nairobi land, declaring it belongs to the company. You can follow the story on page 20 of the Star this morning. And Nairobi warms up to Africa Climate Summit delegates. Motorists ride electric bikes under a green transport scheme to reduce carbon emission and pollution yesterday. That was happening at the city center. You can follow the story on page 7 of the Star this morning. People Daily talks on to save broke varsities. We have cabinet secretaries pledging bailout. Machogu says public universities owes 62 billion shillings to state agencies such as KRA and NHIF. A team has been formed to advise on whether this debt can be written off. Should this be done, the institutions will have to pay off other obligations such as money owed to suppliers. And you have the story on page 6 of the People Daily this morning. New funding model set to raise more money. He was seeking to have 62 billion shillings as waiver of these varsities, and that is pending, of course, given the go-ahead by the legislators. This story continues on page 6 of the People Daily. Food security top agenda at climate talks. First ever Africa Climate Summit kicks off in Nairobi today, and on the table in the question of how the continent can combat drought, which has reduced African countries' capacity to feed their citizens. You have the story on page 4 and 5 of the People Daily this morning. Champions of climate action. That story inside the People Daily as well. Arsenal fire. 3 goals past Man United in a thrilling tie. And MPs on mission to revive struggling sugar millers. This story continues on page 15 of the People Daily this morning. Mrithi wa Raila. That is a splash on the front page of Taifa Leo. Ripoti zaeleza mipango yake ya kustaafu siasa yajadiliwa, wengi wakijitokeza kumrithi. And you have the faces there of the likely who likely, or the likely faces that are supposed to be taking that particular seat or him to pass the baton to. You can follow the story on page 2 of Taifa Leo this morning. How Kenya Kura inflated prices for 26 road projects. That is what we have on the front page of the Business Daily this morning. Cost overruns blamed for 145 billion shillings pending bills. Treasury data shows costs rose from 682 billion shillings to 703 billion shillings. Kenya's road agencies, including the Kenya National Highway or Highways Authority, are on the spot for the supervising cost overruns for at least 26 projects and overshooting their budget by more than 20 billion shillings, leading to a spike in pending bills. You have the story inside the Business Daily this morning. How state-backed chronic illness fund will ease pain for diabetes cancer patients. That is another story that you want to follow inside the Business Daily this morning. Kenya Power to pay farm 6 million shillings for fire losses. The High Court has ordered Kenya Power to pay manufacturing firm, that is Serapak Products, 5.9 million shillings after suspected electric fault caused a fire that burnt the company's business premises 10 years ago. It has taken that long, a decade, for them to actually get justice. You can follow the story inside the Business Daily. Global banks are fueling Africa climate crisis report is saying this, and this is what ActionAid has highlighted. Global banks are fueling Africa climate crisis, and of course, when they talk about sustainable financing, it really flies in the face of that as well, with the sustainability report that we've been getting from the banks at the end of the day. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Business Daily. How state-backed chronic illness fund will ease pain for diabetes, cancer and patients. I'd read that for you on the ticker, but you can follow the story on page 4 of the Business Daily. Across the borders, we begin with Tanzania, where we have anguish of timber plant workers as the revelation on the front page of a Citizen in Tanzania. Employees at some timber processing factories in Mafinga town suffer in silence of arbitrary deductions on their pay, and the employees or the employers' reluctance to provide them with protective gear. This is a special report on page 2 and 3 of the Citizen this morning. There's an international message from the Pope, and he hails the power of interfaith dialogue there on page 18. You can follow that story inside the Citizen. In Uganda, inside Uganda's battle with terrorist threats, that is a splash today. Also, we have the Healthy Living magazine coming in handy for you every Monday inside the Daily Monitor. Why you should consider freezing your eggs, and FDC refuses to fund Birigwa's conference. That is the story that you want to follow inside the Daily Monitor. In Rwanda, the New Times, inside Rwanda's 15 billion Rwandan francs plan to fix gender inequality in peacekeeping. Only 1,000 female peacekeepers have been deployed since 2004. And the story continues on page 3 of the New Times. First Lady Grace's gender equality mental health campaign launch. That is a story that you want to follow inside the New Times this morning. First Lady Jeanette Kagame with other officials during the official launch of the campaign that advocates for gender equality in healthcare during Kigali Car-Free Day mass sports on Sunday. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Citizen. Also, Minister Michelle on genocide fugitive in UK relations with Rwanda. All that's tucked away inside the New Times. And these are the latest also on the international publications, but the East African is here. And East Africa bloc in a new push to keep out Mitumba imports is a splash. Uganda, Kenya are taking after Rwanda, which effected the ban, a decision fraught with political and economic repercussions. And you have the story on page 4 of East Africa this morning. DR Congo's unwanted peace missions. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo blame radical groups for fueling protests against peacekeepers. This is on page 5 of the East African. Riding on clean energy. Kenya's President William Ruto tests an electric motorcycle at the national launch of the e-Boda Boda project in Mombasa at Kenyan coastal city of Mombasa on September the 1st. And this is the buzz right now. It should be and will be the whole week as we've trained our focus on KSCC with the Africa Climate Summit. China Daily this morning is holding this splash. Foreign firms rosy on Chinese markets. Executives express confidence in nation's further opening up of services sector. That is a story that you want to follow inside China Daily this morning. Another proxy war will be a huge blunder, and that is a wild watch there by Lao Siu Kai. You can follow the story inside the China Daily this morning. The Economist is holding this splash. That is artificial intelligence voted, AI voted. That is how the Economist is looking this morning. Paranoid nationalism and corruption. Also the property price paradox, arms control, Oppenheimer's nightmare. And also Chile, 50 years after the coup. How is it faring? That is what the Economist is focusing on this week. You can follow the story. How artificial intelligence will affect the elections of 2024 and all that is tucked away in the US. The Newsweek, forget keto, intermittent fasting and Ozempic. The facts about what works and what doesn't are still elusive. Right, you can read all about it. For the healthy buffs, the search for the perfect diet is what the Newsweek is focusing on today. Also, we'll look at other, of course, dailies as well, much later, looking at the editorial cartoons as well this morning, just to give you an inkling of what is happening and to give you a feel of the political tone and tenor in the country. This is the dailies today. This is the Standard as well, as I was showing you. Right now we have with us in studio, just to hear his voice, Dr. Makale Mulu. Up and Dali as always. I always say, to have the blanket victory in the morning is a big thing, especially when for the legislators they're on a recess right now.
Yeah.
Good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you at the bar.
Yes.
So good morning.
Yes.
Good morning, viewers. It seems like we are starting the week on a high note.
Yes.
With the climate change forum in town, the summit.
Yes.
But generally, the week was good in the bar. This weekend I didn't make it to Kitui. I had some things I was doing in town.
Yes.
But as usual, representation and sending the required resources to support the activities on the ground. That one I did. Two highlights of the week. We started the registration of the elderly in terms of this support to the social protection, issue, supporting the elderly. And it kicked off well. Quite a number of our elderly who are over 70 presented themselves on Friday for registration. They have started a new registration. After a long time, there was a break of about 4 years where we didn't have any registration. So now that they are registering, the elderly are very excited and they came out in big numbers to register on Friday. This exercise is ongoing. So we continue supporting it as members of parliament so that we get our people benefit from the 2,000 per month. At the same time, we did lose one of our former councillors, one of our elders who used to be a former councillor. Former councillors used to hold a lot of power. So he was buried on Saturday, where I did send representation. It was a big loss to us as a constituency because these were the pioneer councillors, the old men who did a lot of work for us, and we used to cover a very big area in terms of representation. And our people normally appreciate them and the work they did for us when they were in power. So those are the highlights of the week. This week it seems like
I thought you'll give us a highlight as well. We shall discuss it.
It looks like this week
where Kalonzo Musyoka
we'll discuss it as we move forward.
He's rowing back on what he had said. So he's clarifying that
he said he was misquoted.
He was misquoted by the media.
And he's the one saying it. So I believe him when he says he was misquoted because anytime you say something, there's always the context in which you're making your statements. And I think what he was saying is, when you look at the context and the environment from where he was talking,
yes,
and look at what was reported, it looks like they only picked that small part of the statement.
So it was quoted out of context, is what you want to say?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's what he's saying, and I believe him, because being the originator of the statement, then always you have intentions of what you want to communicate. But you know, as usual, people are there to analyze statements. That's why anytime you talk, you must be very careful what you want to say, because whatever statement you make, people will be able to analyze it. But you know, the week was also a lot of politics during the week. You remember the issue of the three options, where cartels and the corrupt people must have. That was also another debate. There was the issue where Honorable Raila has rubbished some of the issues which the president did say. Those were also part of the politics. So it was a week full of politics. But at the same time, I got very interested in the issues of climate change. Because this is an area where, as a country now, we are honored to have this African summit, which is going to bring on board about 20 presidents or leaders of countries, serious delegations from different countries also.
Yes.
But of concern to most of the non-state actors was that we all thought this is going to be an African summit. There's a lot of Western...
we shall look at that.
So these are the issues about which, and I think we'll be debating.
Yeah, we shall look at that as well.
But as a country, we feel honored to host this. And I think what is coming out is like, and it always has been the case, Kenya is one of the top countries when it comes to provision of leadership in this continent. So what we are doing is expected of us, since we are leaders in this continent.
Thank you.
And it's something we really want to support, so that to me, I see some of these things as historical injustice, matters and environment.
All right.
So
we shall look at that.
We must be able to discuss.
Let's hope in Hilary Sigay as well. Good morning, sir. And thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate. We wanted to know, of course, this time forth, I think you were in Nairobi. You didn't go to Bomet.
Yes, I didn't travel this
You didn't travel?
Yes.
But the latest development is the passing also of a climate change bill now that the president has sent it into it. If you're privy to it, also you'll tease out some of the things that are raised there that maybe could have just helped us to understand, especially with the Nairobi, or not really the Nairobi, but the National Carbon Trading Registry. Yeah, many Kenyans, they still, some of these terms, they really go way over their head in terms of unpacking them. We can get a better understanding as we move forward as well. But before we also hear from Hilary Sigay, let us just find out how the weather will be today, right? Because it's all about climate change as well. We need to know also how the weather will be today, which is up next. Indeed, that's how the weather will be today. Of course, just getting a glimpse of it as well. I wanted to hear from Hilary Sigay. Good morning, as I've mentioned. Maybe I should just get first to your introductory remarks before we go to the gritty details about the climate change that we shall be discussing. Just a bit of it.
Thank you, Dibal, and I'm happy to be here again today. Indeed, it's a wonderful day. I believe that we're going to have as much a conversation beyond the climate change as possible. And as you said earlier on when you're introducing, it's been a week full of a lot of experiences, new experiences within town. And above all, I think more importantly is the preparation that we've had towards the summit that is beginning today. Mm-hmm. Remember, the Senate was convened on a special sitting in the course of last week. That was on Tuesday and Thursday, mm-hmm. where what was on the table was basically to deal with two items. One was to institutionalize the bipartisan talks which are going on between the team Kenya Kwanza and Azimio Alliance, and two, but more importantly, was the passage of the Climate Change Amendment Bill 2023, which had to be enacted prior to the commencement of the climate summit that is happening today. So it's really been an interesting week for me. It's a week that, as I've said, was full of experiences, and a lot of assignments went into what we are now celebrating. I actually dare say we're celebrating because for the very first time from the history of Kenya, we are hosting more than 20 presidents. And globally so, it is not a small achievement. Mm-hmm. More than 20 presidents, hundreds of ministers from across the globe is not a simple thing. I'm sure you have experienced the extent of the preparedness, how KICC has completely been transformed within a period of 1 week. It's something that I was saying yesterday that I wish we could maintain that extent of preparedness in terms of the people we are expecting to host. And so straight to what you asked about the climate change.
Right.
And
before we head there, I think
yes.
it would be nice maybe just to set a tone with the stories that we have so far so that we can get just an inkling of what we expect as well. And as you're aware, the climate delegates across the world have converged here in Nairobi ahead of the first African summit on climate change, amid calls by the non-government actors across the continent who have challenged their accreditation and representation in the planned summit in Nairobi. The Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, that is PACJA, have expressed deep concern and disappointment over the preparation and agenda of the summit, saying organizational lapses, apparent civil society exclusion, and Western interest have dominated in the preparation of the summit. At the same time, different stakeholders led by the church have outlined their expectations ahead of the summit that will begin officially this morning. Willie Lusige start us off.
Sunday. Nairobi was turned into a beehive of activities, all signifying the importance of the African Climate Summit 2023, the first of its kind in Africa, bringing together state leaders, organizations, and climate stakeholders across the world to chart a way forward on climate change and Africa as a continent. Nairobi hosting the biggest electric vehicle parade, including buses, motorbikes, cars, and bikes, among others. Actors across the continent challenging the accreditation and representation of the planned African Climate Summit in Nairobi. The Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance expressed deep concern and disappointment over the preparation and agenda of the summit, saying organizational lapses, apparent civil society exclusion, and Western interest have dominated in the preparation of the summit.
Summit organizers have deliberately failed to ensure adequate participation and consultation of non-state actors, especially those from the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, in planning and implementation of the summit.
The NGOs accusing the summit organizers of deliberately failing to ensure adequate participation and consultation of non-state actors, especially those from the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, in the planning and implementation of the summit.
Matters of climate change cannot be politicized, cannot be reduced to economists, cannot be commodified, cannot be objectified, and must be treated as a matter of life and death.
According to the organization, the summit has majored on promoting market-based solutions and transnational corporations involvement, which does not address the people's and the planet's needs and rights, calling on African leaders to rethink on the agenda of the summit.
We must not use this summit to glorify and justify more investments in commercial agriculture that has put us in the problems that we are in today.
Kenyan youths allied to the operation, Linda Ugatuzi, also complained of being sidelined and being denied a chance to attend the summit.
That thousands of interested young people who applied as delegates for the Africa Climate Summit expressed profound disappointment and frustrations they have met in the hands of the Ministry of Environment committee in charge of the entire event planning. On Monday morning, we will do or have a Solomonic peaceful pilgrimage to the KICC so that we have ourselves present in that particular meeting.
Interreligious leaders converged in Kiambu County at Deliverance Church International in Ruiru and expressed their deep concern about the crisis caused by the climate change on the continent and the adverse effect on communities.
We know the developed world has really contributed much in the pollution of the air and the environment, and so therefore let's not narrow on what the small person is doing, in as much as we would want everybody to commit to securing our environment and our earth. Let's also look at who is contributing much.
Thus, we call for the rejection of the promotion of carbon markets that are not responsible and not serve the climate justice imperatives for Africa.
Majority of the participants have already arrived here in Nairobi ahead of the African Summit 2023, which will begin on Monday and continue up to 6th of September. Already stakeholders, some of them being non-governmental organizations, are complaining that this summit might end up being a way to collect money from the West, but not to put in place rules and measures to govern the continent against pollution, especially from the West, that has been the biggest contributor of the climate change felt in African continent. Willie Lusige, KTN News, Nairobi at the KICC.
And Africa must be the leader in search for solutions around climate change, even as Nairobi prepares to host climate champions during the Africa Climate Summit. In order to change the tide, stakeholders say everyone must come on board and play their part in finding solutions. Dennis Aseto has more on this.
Africa has been sitting on the fence for long as effects of climate change play out. Now, the reality is hitting home as more and more regions feel the heat. Food challenges are now a common occurrence, and as resources continue shrinking amid a rising population, more conflicts are emerging. As the Africa Climate Summit kicks off in Nairobi, it is a moment that signifies an awakening continent as leaders unite in coming up with homegrown solutions to emerging challenges. Top on the agenda will be how Africa will lead this conversation and be the one to offer solutions not only for the continent but the world. And this could start with taking advantage of what the continent has and use it to negotiate.
We do control how fast we develop our carbon credit markets, and we do control how much we're able to take advantage of the natural resources we have on the continent to allow other countries to invest in Africa. So that's where the capital is.
But even as the talk on lowering emissions continues, some experts say Africa must look at itself as a continent with the potential of leading the path in clean energy.
We try to figure out what is the need in the country, what does the government want to do, and then within the plans of the government, how can GIAP come in to support the private sector with deploying more capital, the private sector with deploying more technology, young people who are the most innovative part of society, how can they actually be providing the solutions to the problems that the country is trying to solve as well.
And as climate change continues biting, some experts are warning that more shocks will continue to be experienced. But they say African governments must be willing to change how they have been approaching the new but unsettling normal. But cushioning the most vulnerable in the society should be the top priority.
One way that we can do this is to use the power of our procurement in institutional markets, specifically school meals. Africa has done very well. Between 2013 and 2019, we doubled the number of children that were covered under school meals, from about 35 million to 65 million. We need to reach 240 million, so there's still a long way to go.
The Africa Climate Summit will see a house united, hopefully, in combating a vicious and vengeful Mother Nature whose anger humanity stoked. China, the United States, Russia, India and Japan are the world's top producers of the harmful carbon dioxide. Africa, on her part, contributes less than 4% of the same collectively. But the continent is facing effects of climate change. This is due to weak policies, lack of coordinated approach in combating the effects of climate change, and a weak bargaining power in global affairs. It is hoped that at the end of the summit, a new approach will be realized. For KTN News, I'm Dennis Aseto.
Now, Kenya Green Building Society, in partnership with Alliance for Science, hosted the Pre-Climate Summit event in Nairobi. The pre-event held at the Climate Action Zone plays a crucial role in mobilizing sustainable financing and partnerships for the built environment, which is a key focus for the Kenya Green Building Society, as green buildings lead part of the wider sustainable urbanization and infrastructure track for the summit. Speaking at the event, Nairobi Governor Johnson Sakaja said there was a need for green construction, not just to meet Nairobi's climate goals, but to grow the economy and our resources. The Executive Director of Alliance for Science, Dr. Sheila Ogbogju, said that they will be dealing with climate-related challenges many years later in Nairobi, and the green city in the sun and a place of cold waters.
It's time for us to dream of better futures, but at the same time we have the knowledge of what it will cost us and how as a planet we should prepare ourselves to meet those costs.
Climate, money, infrastructure, resources. These are immensely serious challenges. How do we meet them? First of all, together. We must meet them together. We need to see it as concerted effort from all players, because we know the cost of not doing it. We need green construction, not just to meet our climate goals, but to grow our economy and our resources. And as I've said, all interventions in climate action must have a direct impact on jobs and on the economy.
And President William Ruto's continued call for a concerted global effort to fight climate change paints a picture of a man in need to lead the world in mitigating the impact of climate change. Our reporter, Grace Nganga, reports on President Ruto, the environmental activist.
I, William Samoei Ruto.
For President William Ruto's doctorate in philosophy in plant ecology, the thesis at the University of Nairobi School of Biological Sciences 5 years ago was on the influence of anthropogenic activities on land use or cover changes and environmental quality of Saiwa wetland watershed, Western Kenya. He holds a bachelor's degree in botany and zoology and a master's in plant ecology. It is not clear if his educational background or his position as Kenya's head of state that has fired up a man whose passion for environment is taking the continent and the global scene by storm. Most of Ruto's speeches and addresses across the African and global cities have had the hallmarks of a climate change activism. Sunday, the head of state drove himself from State House to Kenyatta International Conference Center, KICC, in a motorcade of electric cars and bicycles. Tuesday, President Ruto will lead in hosting the inaugural African Environmental Summit in Nairobi as a build-up of a series of meetings and talks that the president has spearheaded in his pursuit for climate change campaign. At the local, continental and global arenas, President Ruto currently chairs the African Union's Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, who has been vocal on the need for entrenchment of environmental management issues at the core of nations building.
Our sole business will be to mobilize and converge around a common position and advocate for global alignment on a green growth agenda complemented by a transformative global climate finance compact.
Days after he was sworn into office, Ruto chaired a high-level meeting on conference, which is responsible for coordinating Africa's common position on climate change during his trip to the 77th United Nations General Assembly, UNGA. Since his first address at UNGA, where he called upon the World Bank, the IMF, and other multilateral lenders to extend pandemic-related debt relief to the worst-hit countries, especially those affected by the devastating combination of conflict, climate change, and COVID-19. Ruto's pedestal at the environmental management at the continental and global forums. During the opening of the African Youth Climate Assembly, Ruto said the youth have often been told that they are the custodians of tomorrow.
Sababu tuko na rasilimali katika bara letu la Afrika. Tunataka tuwe na mjadala na wale ndugu zetu wa kutoka bara zingine. Waje na rasilimali zao. Wako na teknolojia, wako na fedha, sisi tuko na rasilimali.
Ruto, in a two-day meeting in Paris, made the bold proposal on global financial reforms to increase financial flows for development and climate action during a session with President Emmanuel Macron. In his address during the Comoros celebration of the 48th Independence Day, Ruto said climate change continued to ravage the world and the continent, in particular, questioning whether the globe has recovered from a horrific pandemic as it faced a triple planetary crisis of pollution, biodiversity loss in climate change, as well as unrelenting economic crisis fueled by geopolitical unrest. Consequently, he said millions of individuals worldwide had suffered negative effects, including threats to their lives and livelihoods. Ruto has remained adamant on walking the talk on environmental conservation, calling for a concerted global effort to fight climate change, saying the consequences are a threat to all nations. Grace Nganga, KTN News, Nairobi.
Indeed, thank you, Grace Nganga. And just be informed as well that we had red zones where some roads have been closed for the purposes of this conference that you need to be aware. Parliament Road, also Taifa Road, that is City Hallway Road as well, has been cordoned off for the climate summit. So you might be a bit inconvenienced if you go to those places this morning, and this is bound to be happening the rest of this week as well. But let's just put those stories into perspective. I mean, the main big agenda is climate change, and how that is adversely affecting Africa. We also contributing only 3%, but of bearing the brand of what the global north is doing, or the entire world is doing as far as the climate change is concerned. And this is what many people have been raising questions regarding how we are suffering and bearing the brunt of climate change, yet remedial measures are not really coming our way when it comes also to compensation. And this is what we want to discuss with our panelists just briefly this morning, as we focus on other stories as well that are climate change related and also politically related as well. Before we went to the stories, we want to hear from you, Hilaris, again.
Once again, thank you, Dibal. I had begun acknowledging the importance of the summit, which actually led to the recalling of the Senate that was on recess to debate and pass the bill on climate change. And it largely speaks to the issues you've raised, including the fact that we desire to benefit beyond what we are benefiting now as a country. And looking at the Climate Change Act 2006, this is the one that we were amending. The National Assembly passed, I believe, last week, that one, and then we came in last week, and the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, actually this was a bill that was tabled by the Leader of Majority, of course, being then a government bill. We had it for the first reading on Tuesday. We had public participation on Wednesday. We had the second and third reading on Thursday. And so basically we went through the motions that are relevant for purposes of enacting a legislation. And the interest that this has developed is quite massive. When you look at what's going on at KICC right now, I'm seeing the newspapers are reporting that it's over 20,000 delegates who have registered to participate. And I am reliably informed that indeed that is the numbers, but then it is actually beyond the expectation in terms of the numbers. That tells you the extent of the importance the world has taken on this summit. Our amendment to the Act, therefore, has taken into perspective the importance the government of the day has taken in protection of the climate, the global warming, our environment generally, and now the direct benefits that we should benefit from carbon trading as a country, and a lot of proposed amendments which actually were passed are towards ensuring that the country benefits from carbon trading. Over time, we had from 2016 the Paris Agreement on 2005, the Paris Agreement on climate change has over time not directly benefited the country. Though when we look at, for instance, what you had earlier on as the registry that the Act seeks to develop at the national level, is to ensure that we have run a registry of all carbon trading projects, programs, how they are to be implemented, and it still seeks to ensure that with those implementations, who is directly benefiting and to what percentage. It's introduced also the role of the county governments, so that besides sharing with the national government the proceeds coming from that kind of a project, then a share relevant to the county government is paid out. There are so many new issues that were introduced in the Act, and including the role that the Cabinet Secretary was given to develop regulations towards implementation of now a number of the desired programs and rules which will govern carbon trading and carbon credit projects, introduction of the youth to participate in the National Climate Change Council. Previously, the youth was not considered. That tells you also the aspect that the government has seen in the role played by the youth. We're being told almost every day that plant trees, and one of the things, Dibal, that we had to debate at length is to distinguish between planting trees and growing trees. The president has championed a target at 15 billion trees in 10 years. Is that planting? Is that growing? We've been told plant trees to be paid. If we don't appreciate the direct benefit that we get by growing trees, we definitely will not go out of our way to make sure that we achieve that target. And that is what the conversation around the amendment to the Act is now aimed at. We are told that over 20,000 delegates are there. KICC can host, I believe, not more than 20,000 people. But it tells you the importance of all this process. And I'm so sure that at the end of this week, we will have had a completely different perspective as Kenyans, as leaders who've been encouraged to plant trees. I am, of course, aware that, as I was saying, we will plant, but we are also encouraged to make sure that we grow, so that over a period of time, we directly benefit. And that is why we tell people, especially planting trees, you will be earning double. You're harvesting fruits, largely, for instance, the avocado or oranges, you are earning out of the fruits that you get. At the same time, you're paid because of now the carbon trading, the emissions, and the direct benefit that ultimately you will get as a tree grower or as a fruit grower in the long run. So I'm looking forward to a number of other new developments and resolutions that will be passed by the summit.
Right. We'll hear from Dr. Makale Muli on the other side of the break, especially with the report from ActionAid regarding how the banks also are fueling this crisis as well. When they talk about sustainability, are they living, of course, up to that particular word of sustainability, and how they're fueling the crisis, especially when it comes to the fossil fuels as well? We shall